Good afternoon. On behalf of AAE Board Member and Director of Professional Development Greg Dietz, it's my pleasure to welcome you to another webinar hosted by the American Association for Employment and Education. Today's topic is lessons learned from teachers' experiences during COVID-19. My name is Tim Newbert and I'm the Executive Director of AAE. Please allow me to cover just a few housekeeping matters before we begin with today's topic. During the webinar, all attendees will be muted by default. However, you are encouraged to submit your questions, comments, or responses throughout the presentation via the chat tool within Zoom, and our presenters will allow time to address them. When using chat, you are encouraged to change the recipient default to all presenters and attendees to maximize participation. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to attendees and AAE members. If you are not currently a member of AAE, please visit our website, aaee.org, for more information. We are a professional association intent on positively impacting education through professional connections. Related to that mission, we connect the three critical groups involved with the preparation, recruitment, and retention of pre-K through 12 educators, university professionals and others who prepare educators, school system professionals and others who recruit and hire them, and of course, educator candidates themselves. We offer annual publications such as the Job Search Handbook for Educators. We conduct an educator supply and demand survey each fall and winter, resulting in a spring report. We host a pre-K through 12 job board and a calendar of education job fairs held around the country. We host webinars such as this one on topics relevant to our membership. We sponsor teacher scholarships and school system mini grants to support teacher pipelines. And we host an annual conference and education career fair each fall. This year's events will be hosted virtually in late October 2020, and the deadline for early bird registration pricing is today. Joining us today are Henry Wellington, Dr. Lois Berlin, and Dr. Nicole Simon. Henry Wellington is the founder of CEO of Upbeat. After teaching middle school special education in New York City, district and charter schools, Henry supported education technology companies in their sales and marketing strategies at Whiteboard Advisors. He also played a key role in the implementation of blended learning and evaluation of education technology products for Citizens schools. During her more than 40 years in education, Dr. Lois Berlin taught middle school special needs students for 5 years near Aberdeen, Scotland, and then became a teacher in the Alexandria City Public Schools in the US. During her 24 years in ACPS, she served as a teacher, assistant principal, and associate superintendent for curriculum instruction. In 2004, she was appointed superintendent of the Falls Church City Public Schools in Falls Church, Virginia, where she served until her retirement in 2011. In 2017, Lois came out of retirement to serve as interim superintendent of the Alexandria City Public Schools for 1 year. Dr. Nicole Simon is a University Academic Affairs Director at CUNY. Simon earned her doctorate at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where she remains a research affiliate with Harvard's project on the next generation of teachers. She served as a Harvard Presidential Public Service Fellow at Boston Public Schools and as a Radcliffe-Rappaport Policy Fellow at the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Simon began her career at the Urban Assembly School for Law and Justice, a Brooklyn public school. She is the author of several book chapters and co-author of articles published by Teachers College Record, Educational Leadership, and Educational Evaluation and Policy Analysis. Today's session, Lessons Learned from Teachers' Experiences During COVID-19, will focus on the Teaching from Home survey conducted by Upbeat in partnership with several school districts and completed by 7,200 teachers from across different states and teaching backgrounds. After analyzing the results of the survey, a report was produced entitled Teachers' Experiences Working from Home During the COVID-19 Pandemic. This report was referenced on chalkbeat.com shortly after publication and was also cited in the cover story of this past weekend's edition of the New York Times Magazine. Based on results from this report, today's presenters will examine the implications for this school year, as well as research and discussion on how to support teachers and maintain a positive school culture during the challenging school year ahead. Thank you for joining us today, Nicole, Henry, and Lois. I will now turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Tim. We appreciate it. So just to quickly give attendees an overview here, I know we did introductions. Nicole is going to provide the findings from the report and an overview of how the report was conducted and the survey participants and some of the key learnings from it. And then Lois Berlin, my colleague here, is going to share some of the implications for this year. I know we want everyone here to come away with some best practices and some strategies that they can implement. And I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for joining us today. It's very hard to imagine a more chaotic beginning to the school year, and so we're really appreciative that you're taking the time to join us. So as Tim shared, I was a middle school, I'll just give a quick overview to everyone of Upbeat. I was a middle school special education teacher and I taught in New York City, and I worked at a couple schools that had a lot of turnover. And I saw how that impacted the students at those schools when their go-to teacher was gone, or when we lost the continuity of getting on the same page with discipline or getting on the same page with curriculum as a staff. And I had been a teacher recruiter before I became a teacher. So I had been a part of a very thorough process to bring in and vet teachers and hire them, but I didn't see that kind of thorough process occurring at the schools where I taught around retaining teachers. So I ended up actually, through reading a paper that Nicole wrote called Teacher Turnover in High Poverty Schools, finding that there's a huge amount of research demonstrating that organizational culture and working conditions drive turnover for teachers and drive them in any kind of school setting. And so I ended up, that pushed me to go on this path to build Upbeat, and we're now working across several states, and we administer a survey that's grounded in the research on teacher retention, and then we work with our partners to take next steps with that data. Just quickly, some feedback that we have been getting from district leaders and principals, 100% sharing that the survey is useful to address teacher retention issues, that the reports are high quality, that we're responsive to questions and concerns, and that we can help accomplish their goals as a leader. I'm really proud of this. I think principals are the toughest critics. And so we're really happy with the feedback they provided. So I just want to make sure that everyone is aware of the work we're doing at Upbeat. But I'll go ahead and move to the next phase to start to get into our research findings and take it to Nicole.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nicole Simon, as Henry said, and I just want to, sorry,
That's
where that's coming from. So I just want to reiterate the thank you for all of you for being here. I'm speaking to you from New York City. I spent the morning on Zooms with principals and teachers here. We're doing our delayed start on Monday, and I'm very keenly aware of the chaos ensuing here and across the country, and how hard people at everywhere across the landscape of our field are working right now. So really, thank you so much for being here. We hope it's informational and helpful. So you can go to the next slide, Henry, please. So with my colleague, Matt Kraft, I worked on conducting the Teaching from Home survey for Upbeat back in April and May of this year, so right around the beginning of the pandemic. We heard from teachers via survey in 194 schools across 9 states, 8 districts, and 3 charter networks. We heard from over 7,000 teachers, and actually I think we have since gotten more data. So I think we're up to 8,000 teachers. And our response rate was very high, so 78% response rate, which I think is extra exciting given the timing of this study and what teachers were contending with at the time. Our research complements other smaller studies that were conducted by other outlets such as USA Today, Educators for Excellence, EdWeek, RAND, and a number of others. Matt and I have since worked on a longer academic paper from the original report that we published back in, I don't remember what month we published it. Summer is what it says. And we review a lot of the research that had been done to date there. So if you're interested, you can take a look. Henry can send that out later. So here's a little bit of a sense of the demographics of the teachers and the teachers who we surveyed and the students who they serve. So as you can see, the teachers who we surveyed were pretty experienced, 13 years on average, mostly women. Majority white teachers, which reflects the national averages, but we had a sizable minority of Black teachers. And then the students who they were serving, about half of those students were growing up in low-income families, and about half were students of color. Again, we had roughly a quarter of the students being served via the surveyed teachers were Black, and again, a sizable minority of Hispanic students. So our great big finding, you can do the next, was that emergency remote teaching was hard. Turns out, and it was hard for everybody. However, what we learned and more importantly collected some useful evidence for is that supportive working conditions were really a protective factor for teachers. So if teachers worked in schools where they rated their schools as supportive on a number of dimensions in the survey, we found that they were a lot less likely to report that their sense of success plummeted. So you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So as you can see here, we asked teachers to report whether they felt successful at their job when they were teaching in person before the pandemic, and then we asked them to report in April and May how successful they felt during the pandemic while teaching at home. And then we constructed an overall measure of working conditions during the pandemic by combining teachers' responses to the 7 working condition questions on the survey about the degrees to which their district, school administrators, and peers were supportive of them. So as you can see from this graphic, in schools that had highly supportive working conditions, the percent of teachers who felt successful declined, but it declined only by 6% points, from 99% of teachers feeling successful prior to the pandemic to 93% feeling successful. That's 7% points. There must have been a decimal there. Feeling successful during the pandemic. But in schools where teachers said that they had unsupportive working conditions, the percent of teachers who felt successful plummeted by 42 percentage points, from 90% to 48%. So overall, on average, no matter where teachers taught, their sense of success dropped really alarmingly substantially and quickly after the transition. So here we see that before the pandemic started, 96% of teachers said, yeah, I feel successful in my work. And post-pandemic, or during the pandemic, only 3/4 or so of teachers said the same thing. And we know, based on lots of prior research, a good amount by our mentor, Susan Moore Johnson, and many others, that this is enormously problematic, and that teachers who do not feel successful in their work often are not successful in their work and frequently leave the profession. And also I want to note that Matt and I did some digging into how typical is this kind of a drop, and we found no evidence that this kind of a drop is typical at all. So it's really rare for teachers to suddenly start to feel completely unsuccessful, even teachers who do leave the profession, even in studies of teacher turnover and what drives people out. A sudden plummet of feeling unsuccessful is really unusual. So we found that that teachers, particularly mid-career teachers, were struggling to balance their work with the demands of their personal lives. Sorry, I think this, I already talked about this slide. We just forgot to go to it. You can go to the next one. So here you can see that teachers were really struggling to balance their work with the demands of their personal lives during the pandemic. So this was especially true of mid-career teachers who report way higher rates of taking care of other people during the pandemic. And so not surprising, mid-career teachers, so we define that as teachers with 5 to 15 years of experience, are often those with little kids at home. And so trying to teach remotely using entirely new set of strategies while your 3-year-old is bopping around the house, maybe screaming at your 5-year-old. Turns out that's real hard. So overall, we found that 16% of teachers reported that they struggled with this balance. And of course, it was much starker amongst mid-career teachers and teachers who had caretaking responsibilities, and not surprisingly among women. We found that teachers said that they were uncomfortable using the technological tools, although they learned quickly. And the more experienced the teachers were, then the more likely they were to report feeling challenged by the technological components of teaching remotely. So this next section is about teachers' reports of student engagement. So teachers reported really concerning rates of student engagement. On average, teachers reported that only 60% of their students were regularly engaging in remote learning activities. A school with a 60% attendance rate would probably not survive for very long. So teachers in high poverty schools were reporting much lower rates of engagement. In schools that served primarily low-income students, only 50% of students were regularly engaging, according to the teachers. And that's in contrast to low poverty schools, where students were participating at an average rate of 75% of those students were participating regularly in remote schooling. And that these discrepancies were most stark in schools that served a majority of Black students. So teachers in those schools reported that only 45% of their students were engaging regularly, but at schools that enrolled fewer than 10% of Black students, teachers reported that 72% of their students were regularly engaging in remote learning. So just to reiterate that incredible gap, 45% in majority Black schools and 72% in schools where there were very few Black students. And you know, Matt and I spent a lot of time discussing this and thinking about it. And clearly this reflects major systemic disparities across communities in education, but also in economic and health conditions. And it's critical to note that that low-income communities and communities where Black students live were far more affected by the virus itself, by the job loss, by continuing housing loss, and had less access to resources, both internet and hard wiring technology, and also probably were more likely to have parents who were essential workers and couldn't engage with them as much as they would have liked. And then, we have also in prior work demonstrated that schools serving low-income students and Black students are just far more likely to have less supportive working conditions. Those schools are famously harder places to work because of the disinvestment and the way that we organize structures in our school system. And then we also found that, of course, as Lois will talk about later, that access to technology was a huge piece of why students weren't engaging. So only 75% of teachers by May reported that their students even had the tools that they needed to be engaging in remote learning. And in schools, and in high poverty schools, only 64% of teachers reported that their students had what they needed. And that was in comparison with higher income schools where 87% of teachers reported that their students had what they needed technologically. And again, we ran these numbers by race, and in schools where the majority of students were Black, teachers reported that only 66% of their students had the technology that they needed, whereas in schools where less than 10% of students were Black, 81% of teachers said that their students had what they needed. So in summarizing what we learned, you can go to, this is just a slide that has a summary of basically everything that I just said. I'll give you a second to read. So our big conclusion, as we have on the next slide in 135-point font, is that school level working conditions are more important than ever, that they matter more during a pandemic and during a time of crisis than they do typically, and they matter a whole lot typically. As discussed, we and others have studied working conditions that matter most to teachers in previous work, and we have found that strong leadership, effective working relationships with colleagues, and positive dynamics with students and families matter the most to teachers, and that is what keeps them doing their work in their schools. And our findings here highlight that is exactly true here, and Lois will talk some more. We found that teachers in every career phase and in every life stage, serving students from every kind of community, struggled with the shift to remote learning, but they didn't all struggle in the same ways, and the struggle was much, much starker in some places than in others, and will likely continue to be. But in those schools, in all of our schools, supportive working conditions in the schools mattered. They played a very important role in helping teachers transition really rapidly in this critical time where everything was uncertain, and teachers were worried about their own families and their own health and their the communities that they teach in. So we suggest concretely that strong ongoing communication from folks at the top, coupled with the creation of deliberate teacher teams that are actively supported by administrators, will go a really long way in making teachers feel supported, and in turn make them feel more effective with their students. And we suggest that paying real close attention to the details of organizational functioning must now acknowledge the challenging circumstances that teachers have personally, and that those circumstances are affecting teachers' work. And schools really need to figure out ways to help teachers address those challenges and balance them, rather than trying to compete with them or pretend like they don't exist. So I'll turn over to Dr. Lois Berlin to talk a little bit more from her perspective as a former superintendent, teacher, principal, and everything in between, about some of her kind of suggestions for how we think this work might be helpful to real practitioners in schools and school systems.
Okay, good afternoon. It's really a privilege to be here, and I want to add my thanks to all of you for being here this afternoon. I know as a superintendent and as a teacher and as a principal that it's a crazy time of year anyway, as you get ready for a new school year, and this one is like no other. And in my work through Upbeat with principals over the last year, I've really seen that as I've talked to principals. And communication is one of those areas that is just more important than ever. It's always been important. And I think communication is one of those pieces that we always talk about in education, and how well we're doing it or not doing it. We found through the Upbeat survey results that teachers were saying they thought the communication from the district office and from their administrators or building level administrators was really good. So as I talk to principals, I ask them, what are you doing? Why are you getting these high marks from your teachers around communication? And one of the things they said is, when all of this began, we were inundated and teachers were inundated with so much communication from outside sources. There were all kinds of cottage industries around how you deliver instruction virtually, and teachers were getting masses of emails and notifications. And so principals said, we had to be really clear and targeted and concise and make sure that we were communicating what it was that teachers really needed to know. In addition to all those other emails, teachers were getting communications from students and parents. And so they needed to have clear information to communicate back. One of the most dangerous things is when rumors get going. And so they needed to have really clear and accurate information to communicate. It was up to districts and principals to determine what teachers needed to know about logistics, about training, about the calendar, and to communicate that in a timely manner so that teachers could do the same. And it was also important to communicate expectations to teachers. You do that when you're in the brick and mortar building. And so it was really important to communicate to teachers how much time you expect them to do synchronous and face-to-face instruction with students, how much time they should be spending on collaboration. You're going to have teachers that will go way beyond those time frames, but it was clear to have those expectations spelled out for them, and to give them the flexibility to establish office hours where they could communicate with students and families, particularly teachers who were struggling with the balance of taking care of their own families while attending to their profession. It was important to give them that flexibility so that they could communicate to students and to parents. Here's when I'm available. Here's when I can talk to you and when I will respond to your emails and give you the information you're asking for. It was also important to give teachers the opportunity to provide feedback to administrators and to the district level to let them know how they were doing. The Upbeat survey provided a great tool to do that. It helped to put a hand on the pulse of teachers, to know what they were thinking and how they were feeling about their level of success, whether they were reaching students, and just a myriad of things in terms of training. Did they feel prepared? This was all information that administrators were able to gain through the survey and to begin planning to address. Another important thing in terms of communication was communicating to families and giving them some guidance. We had a whole group of parents who all of a sudden became home teachers. And no matter what they've done in their careers, becoming a teacher overnight to your own children is no easy task. And so giving parents some parameters, telling them some rules to establish, just how to kind of set up school at home was a really helpful thing that parents responded positively to. And finally, as I said, the survey really was a great way to keep a hand on the pulse of the staff and get a sense of how they were doing. Next slide, Ken. I think another piece of really important information for the district in terms of planning was around professional development. As Nicole indicated, teachers who had the longest period of experience teaching really had the most difficulty adjusting to the technology. And newer teachers were, they're digital animals, and so they adjusted to the technology very easily, but they didn't have the experience in the classroom of engaging students and teaching, just the teaching time on the ground. And so it's really important that the training that takes place address those needs and that it's differentiated to really look at the pedagogical practice that newer teachers need to gain and the technology training that our veteran teachers need. And also just talking about presentation without direct interaction. How do you get engagement when you can't walk up to a student with proximity to get their attention? And so these are some of the things that were really important in targeting training needs and giving teachers options for what it was they needed to train under. I know that in planning staff development through the years, we've always talked about a menu approach, and this is even more important given the various needs of teachers as they move into another year of virtual instruction. Next slide, Ken. And of course, even the training has great implications for collaboration. It's important that collaboration take place to give teachers the chance to work together to figure it all out. That younger teachers can help their veteran teammates with the technology, while the veteran teachers can help their younger teammates with the pedagogy. But it's structuring that collaboration is very important too. One of the things that principals emphasize that they focused on is structuring it within the school day. Also, that the scheduling piece could be done by principals, by assistant principals, by grade level or department chairs or team leaders. They really worked with their teachers to determine how that was going to work out best. And they found that teachers could really, through collaboration, support each other to alleviate some of the stresses. If you had a team of teachers where half of them have young children at home, the other half of the team could work with them to carry some of that teaching load at times of the day when those with young children or other responsibilities in the home be it caring for older parents, wouldn't be as flexibly available. And so the collaboration for that piece is very important. One of the things we really found important in supporting teachers with children came from the district level in terms of support with childcare. Teachers, first of all, some districts gave teachers the choice of teaching from their classroom, to actually be present in their classroom where A, they might have better connectivity, and B, they would have the resources they needed. And they gave them the option to bring their school-age children into the classroom with them and let them set up at a corner of the room, and where they could be supervised by their parent, but could work independently. There was one possibility. There was also the one district provided childcare on school premises for children aged 4 to 12. They did this by they provided Chromebooks, they provided a location where they could have social distancing, like the cafeteria or an auditorium, and they had supervision by those staff members who weren't occupied during virtual teaching. For example, bus drivers, food service employees, substitute teachers who may be on retainer and didn't have substitute teaching to do, could oversee and supervise students in this way. They also gave, in many instances, they gave teachers the flexibility to teach from home or to teach within their classroom. And in one case, there were a couple teachers who would take their children to this supervised situation and then go home to teach where they weren't having a disturbance, and then go back and pick up their children. So flexibility was a key piece in that collaboration from the district with teachers. And finally, just providing teachers with options, with availability of different child care situations was an important resource that teachers really appreciated. Knowing that, okay, here's something, a place that has been vetted and that we can work with in terms of supervision for our own children. And, you know, finally, one other thing to think about is that as school systems think about bringing students back, particularly thinking about small groups of students, our special ed students, our ELL students, to think about prioritizing that for children of teachers as well. And particularly that they be in the same building that their parents are in, but to bring them back just to alleviate some of the concern that teachers have about supervision for their children while they're teaching. Next slide, Henry. Nicole talked about engagement and how engagement could vary from the 60s to 80% of students being engaged or having the devices they need to be engaged. And we know that one of the pieces that is so important in terms of engagement is just structure. Do you have the structure at home? How many times have teachers said to parents, just find a nice quiet spot at home for your child to work and do homework? In at least one district that I worked in, we had 2 or 3 families sharing a 2-bedroom apartment. You know, and it's ludicrous to tell people in that kind of situation to find a quiet spot to do your work. So structure is so important in terms of children being able to engage, as well as motivation. We know that students can be logged in, but tuned out. So how do we motivate kids to really be engaged and enjoy what it is that they're learning through this new medium? what we're seeing popping up in a number of school districts around the country are learning pods. And that's something that our more affluent parents are beginning to do. They're finding ways to engage other retired educators or people who feel, who have the expertise and who feel safe being with groups of small groups of children to help supervise their online learning and to help with that virtual learning as kids are engaged by their teachers. Now, it's something that's particular to affluent schools. And one of the things that we see happening is that school systems are beginning to create their own pods for children in poverty. That by partnering with churches, with recreation centers, with daycare providers who normally work with children during the school year, that those pods can be created with safe social distancing and can give children who are in poverty and who don't have that structure in home a structured place to do their schoolwork and to be engaged. So that's something to think about. And finally, there's the issue of connectivity. And it's not just whether you're in poverty and have connectivity, it could be geography. In one of the districts we work with, they have a mountainous region, this is in South Carolina, and there just is not internet connection. I heard stories of parents driving to the school to connect to the mobile hotspot that was on the bus parked in the school parking lot. And some teachers were having to do that as well. So that was having teachers be able to teach from their classroom was one way to alleviate that piece. But we also know it's not just about connectivity. I think it's clear that there's a distress that we all feel for students who we can't see and who aren't connected. We can talk about the more affluent schools having 81% of kids engaged and connected. There's 19% who aren't. So there really is, I know for me as a lifelong educator, there continues to be a worry about those children who aren't engaging and that we can't see. You know, are they hungry? Are they safe? Are they well? I had to put in my little emotional spot there. Henry, next slide. And finally, what we know is really important for our teachers is that they feel appreciation for what it is they're doing. And for our principals and our administrators as well. I had so many principals say to me, I am working harder than I have ever worked before. I feel like I'm 24/7 and there's just no stop. And what we saw from the survey results is that teachers were feeling that they were appreciated, that principals were finding ways to show that appreciation and to really connect with teachers and check in on them. And when I asked, what are the things you're doing? It ranged from calls to individual teachers. Principals would make a schedule for themselves, and other administrators in the building would do the same thing to make sure they were calling and checking in with teachers just to see how they were doing. I talked to supervisors who were doing the same thing with principals. Just giving them a call to say, this is nothing, you know, business-wise, I just want to see how you're doing. They would write notes or postcards to teachers to check in so that they were getting happy mail. And some principals put yard signs up in their teachers' yards saying things like, a great teacher lives here, or we love our East Baton Rouge teachers. We don't work with East Baton Rouge yet, but just an example of what you can do. And some provided drive-through pickup for, at the school for lunches or for snacks. Or one principal told me about a non-alcoholic happy hour in the parking lot, because everybody could pull in together and see each other and wave from a socially distanced socially appropriate distance, and just to be able to connect and see each other was so important. You know, we know that this is a stressful time for all, and attending to the social emotional health of staff is as important as attending to the social emotional health of their students and to the academics. And providing the supports that alleviate that stress are really important. And I just wanted to share one more thing. It's something Nicole shared with me, that when you meet with your teachers, and particularly when you're having, when there are larger group meetings, it's great to try to end on a positive note. One of the things Nicole shared that she does is to ask everyone in the meeting, what are you hopeful for? What gives you hope? So something important to think about, that as you're finding ways to be virtually available and authentic ways for appreciation, that you also find ways to get people thinking positively and of good things to come. And with that, I will defer to Henry and any questions that we might have.
Yeah, we want to open it up. I did just get a text from an attendee that the chat might be disabled.
All right, and I apologize for that. And I don't know that I have the ability to switch that on the fly. So if anybody does have any questions or comments, I'd encourage you to use the Q&A. We know that we've received at least one message in Q&A, so feel free to use that tool. I apologize for the setup.
And you can leave a comment in the Q&A, even though that's really illegal.
That's right.
We encourage a little bit of rule breaking, not too much.
Yeah, I just saw a comment. I'd like to say hi back to Dan Goldhaber. Good to hear from you. He was once one of my school board members in Alexandria.
Wow.
Okay.
So do you think that the fact that no one is asking questions it could be one of a few things. One is it could mean that the technology isn't working. The other is it could mean everybody has all the answers and they don't need any more idea generation.
Or three, that now they have all the answers because you provided them with so much information and solutions.
This is true.
That's most probable, right?
Yep.
Got another note of appreciation in the Q&A.
I can't see the Q&A, so.
Okay, there is a.
Really? I can see it. Marco Munoz says, thank you for the presentation. It was very helpful.
Yeah.
Marco.
Good to know.
Thanks, Marco. He's the one that texted to help us with the chat situation.
Awesome. Thank you, Marco. Wait another minute or so and maybe we'll call it a wrap.
I'd love comments. If people don't have questions, I'd actually really love comments. I'd love to know what else should we be studying? What would you, who have we not represented in this research? Who else should we be talking to? Would qualitative research be helpful at this point? What do we need to know from principals? What do we need to know from students? What do we need to know from teachers? What do you want to know from me? I'd be happy to talk endlessly. And then if you don't have any ideas on that front, I'll put in a plug for Teach Upbeat. I think that that I have really enjoyed working with Upbeat because principals and superintendents and HR folks have told us over and over again that the work we do is personalized and really helps them do their jobs better because we get data from their teachers back in their hands. Oh, what are
I was going to give another plug there as well, just to say that as when Tim introduced me, he said I retired in 2011, and then I came out of retirement, and I retired again in 2018, and I have failed miserably at retirement over and over. And I came to work for Upbeat as a leadership coach because what I liked in particular was not just the information that the survey provides to end users, to principals and to district leaders, but that we do something with the so what. And that's the coaching that I do with principals. I love my work with principals. I love the opportunity to talk about results with them and to brainstorm some of the things that they can do to help increase positive school climate and as a result, retention of teachers.
So it looks, there is a question that came in, and it looks like a comment. So the question is, what are teachers, Kimberly asked, what are teachers feeling about having student teachers during this time? And I don't know if anyone on the panel has an answer to that, or if that maybe Kimberly's making that suggestion for further research. So I'll let any and all of you respond to however you think is best to that, or you're prepared to that question. How teachers are feeling about having student teachers at this time.
You know, I know we've talked to at least one district where they are going to continue to have student teachers. Of course, it's going to be virtual. And so for as long as we're doing this, as teachers are training, as student teachers are training to be teachers, then they still need the opportunity to practice. So I don't think they've quite figured it exactly what it will look like yet. They haven't figured that out. But what I have heard from my colleagues, at least in the Northern Virginia area, is that they intend to continue to do that.
Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
So Henry, you might be able to help me in remembering who put this out. I don't think it was Ed Week, but I saw some data about teaching being a less desired, maybe it was PDK, I don't know who it was. I should figure that out before I talk, but somebody good put out a study about the proportion of college students who want to become teachers now is lower than ever before. And I think that that's what Teach Upbeat is all about, teacher turnover. And I think that sooner or later, teachers who are only hanging on to their jobs right now because they cannot be unemployed are going to leave the profession. And we, as always, do not have a lineup of young, smart, well-educated, recent college grads with lots of career options who are choosing to come into our profession. And I think that is part of why we really need to pay such close attention to what it means to be a teacher right now.
Yeah, I'll just echo that because I know this is what we think about all the time is teacher retention and turnover. And I know that this past spring was, what do we do about remote learning? And this summer was, how do we reopen schools? And now it's September 15th. And, we're just, as you said, Nicole, deeply concerned about what is going to happen to the profession here this year and how it'll impact whether or not people enter it, whether or not people leave it. And, I think that really speaks to what I'm really proud of the fact that we're actively, understanding what's happening right now in this moment and supporting our partners in working to retain their staff. And I think that's critical at this time. So, but yeah, and I think just generally in terms of the kind of larger economic trends, when the economy is not doing so well, more people do enter the profession. But at this point, things are just so murky and unclear that I don't, whoever can make a clear prediction about this is probably, command a handsome fee here. But, it's just, we don't know exactly what the recovery is going to look like. But I would say at a certain point, depending on where the economy goes, there will, there could be more people entering the profession like we've seen in the past, but I don't think that's going to happen for a couple of years. So I think there's just a lot of murkiness right now and lack of clarity. And I think it's critical for us to continue to be looking at this information, analyzing it, and having these discussions.
And Nicole, you're absolutely correct. It's PDK, it's Phi Delta Kappa. They have a poll of the public's attitudes toward the public schools that they've been doing every year for a number of years. And it's something I look at when it comes out every year, and it is, it's unfortunately sad result on where people are with thinking about teaching particularly when it comes to as a career for their child. They're not, they tend to be not in support of that idea. So Dana had a couple of comments, and I think, so she's saying perhaps an area to be readdressed is a comment about the section on the part where teachers felt unsuccessful. I think there was such a huge amount of change at every level, so maybe that would be an area to readdress. I think so many good things are going to come from this upheaval, and we have to focus on how we can learn and make things better and stronger. So I don't know, maybe she's being readdressed during this session, but also maybe this is an opportunity for some further research.
And of course, we'll be surveying teachers again in the fall, so we'll be able to get a sense of their feeling of success. Has training increased and has their feeling of efficacy increased to a point where they're feeling much more successful? We'll be able to see that.
Yeah. And she clarified that she's talking about the gaps between, kind of success, their feeling of being unsuccessful, but then the fact that there are so many good things going on. Just making, I think it's about expectation setting and Lois, as you talked about, it's reflecting that, that people are doing a great job and need to highlight how much their work means to everybody. All right. Anything else before we call it a wrap? We're at 1 minute after the hour, so should we call it a wrap?
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you to AAE for hosting us.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much. Just in closing here, I do want to again thank Nicole, Henry, and Lois for reviewing the Teaching from Home survey and its implications for the future. Also want to thank all attendees for joining us today. If you have not already done so, I hope you'll consider registration for AAE's annual conference and education career fair to be held virtually during the last week of October. I hope you'll also consider attending our October 1st information session when Henry, his colleague Brenda Tanner, and I share details about the opportunity to participate in the second cohort of the National Working Group on Teacher Retention, a collaboration between AAE and Upbeat. You can find more information about all of our activities on our website. Thanks again, everybody, and please enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. Thank you, Lois. Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks.